Hey everybody, Invisiblekatana here, and we got some huge news earlier today. As of recording, at least, it was today for me. We're gonna have hordes in Resident Evil Code Veronica. And here's the post, so you guys can check it out. They're saying we're gonna have hordes. They kind of group together. It's not like, when they were kind of sparse and, trickling in like Raccoon City. We're getting hordes. And the only reason that that's a great mechanic, which in all honesty, I hope that's something they kind of keep around, which makes sense why they had that ending scene at the end of the trailer, which when I first saw that, I was like, I love Claire, but how does she get out of that one? So I think it's gonna be dual wielding. I think that's the thing. Like, they're clearly keeping it in. If you look at the render for Claire, which is right here now, you can see she's got two guns. Aside from the fact that it's just very cool, it shows that they're like, no, we're sticking with the dual wielding mechanic. I have no idea how this is gonna play out. I'm super excited for it. It's gonna be super easy once we get hit with that VR update. I really hope they don't give up on that. Like, we're still waiting for 9 to get an official one, but we also haven't even heard about the DLC for 9 yet. So, they're still, I'm like, please, just as long as they stick with VR, I can live the dream, because as soon as Veronica gets VR, I'm hitting the pose. So, them having hordes is very interesting, and of course there's gonna be the balancing of stuns and what does stun and what doesn't stun, all that jazz. But I'm very excited for this, because now, not only do we still keep the dual wielding mechanic, and we'll see how that turns out, maybe you aim at, it'll probably be exactly like the original game. You aim at one person, and then there will automatically be another character, or another enemy or whatever that ends up being aimed at. I think it's a simple way to do it. You have the reticle on one, and then maybe you can like flick the stick or something like that. They might implement it, or it might just be automatic, where it literally is like you will always dual wield. I don't think that makes a lot of sense to always dual wield, because I think even in the original, they had to be like a certain distance or like within like a certain range, and then she would kind of split off and do the dual wielding. Otherwise, you were just aiming at one enemy and twice the damage. So I am excited to see how that pans out, especially with the remakes having much faster zombies, whether it's any of them. Honestly, once you hit the 2 remake, like the 1 remake is the only one that had this classic slow moving style, and then for 2 and beyond, they move a lot faster. Obviously, you get to 4, that doesn't even really count because those aren't zombies. But even 2 and 3, the zombies are much faster. And if 9 is any indication for how they're going to be treating zombies, if you even think to turn around, they will teleport right into your asshole. Because I don't know what the deal was with 9, but they were like, I'm like, this zombie's on the top of the stairs. I turned around, it's like, ha! It's like, that is ridiculous. So if they're anything like that, where they're just straight up teleporting straight to your back, we're gonna have some trouble with these guys. But they've been moving faster and faster. So I'm excited to see how that turns out, but the dual wielding is definitely gonna help. And of course, that leads into the big question of, what is remake dual wielding? Because in the original game, dual wielding was the M100Ps, which I looked up today and realized it's not the MP100s, even though we call them that all the time. They are M100Ps, like it's M100P. So that kind of blew my mind today, because I'm like, I could have sworn it was the MP100. Like, we all call it that. That's not right. But the M100s, and then you can hold the gold Lugers at one point when you get them from Steve, and they're empty, and it taunts me, like it taunts my nightmares. And then you have the submachine guns when you play as Steve, and then I think there's one other portion where you actually get another set of clips for those as well, if I'm not mistaken. I'm pretty sure there's some other portion where you actually get submachine gun ammo. And that's it. Those are the 3 dual wield weapons in the game. And the gold Lugers are only dual wield weapons in the actual, in the battle mode. In the main campaign, you just get the submachine guns and the M100s. So I'm very curious, like, are we gonna have dual wield handguns? Are we gonna have upgradable weapons? Like, there's a lot of mechanics from more modern Resident Evil games that make me wonder, like, well, how is this gonna turn out? Is it gonna be closer to the classics? Because now that they've decided to do this kind of out of order, it brings in a million questions. Because had they done this before the RE4 remake, it would be like, okay, like, we wouldn't expect upgrades or anything like that. But now it's like, you've done 2 games back to back, where you have the RE4 remake and then RE9, even though the upgrades are garbage compared to, the actual like multitude, 5 different, if not more, handguns, and the different variations on all the different weapons. They did not put that level of detail in, which of course we all wish they did. But when this remake comes out, are we gonna have any sort of upgrades? Is it gonna be, here's the weapons you get? Because in the original Veronica, Code Veronica, you get kind of the standard stuff. Handgun, shotgun, I think you get the crossbow in that one as well. That's, kind of the thing that they give to Claire, just random. Like, how often do you really see crossbows? But that's just like Claire's weapon. At least for 2 and Code Veronica, that was kind of like her weapon. And then, in personal preference, I like her with the grenade launcher. Leon gets the shotgun all the time, Claire just busting out the grenade launcher I always thought was just like her thing. So that's what I always think of. So I'm totally fine if they throw that back in there. That would actually be cool if they threw in like the classic style grenade launcher too, not like the big one. Because even in the 3 remake, they changed it to like a more modern design where it has like the drum. So I would love to see like the single, admittedly, when I think of it, I kind of think of Terminator. So, you give me the T2 style grenade launcher, I'm more than happy with that. Plus that's, classic RE style. I'd be happy if they threw that one in there because I'm sure that's in the game. It's been forever since I played Veronica, but you get your handgun, you get your shotgun, and then the specialty stuff is the dual wielding weapon. So the M100s, the submachine gun, you get like a rifle for like half a second, which I think that'll change. Maybe we'll get the rifle for more of the game. Maybe we'll even take it from Alfred like after, well, maybe not after the first boss fight because that's kind of early in the game anyway. Granted, they could change all that stuff. He could have more than one rifle. He's super rich. It wouldn't surprise me if you just take one of his weapons and then that becomes another reason why he hates you so much. That would actually be kind of awesome. Just to throw in another reason for him to just be like really pissy. And of course, that's me going off the hope that he's even remotely close to what he was in the original game. But for the dual wielding, if we have multiple handguns, can we use 2 handguns at one time? Can we use any single-handed weapon while dual wielding? It's like, okay, well, I have like 5 bullets, in the M100. Well, let me just put this 5 over here, and then I have like another regular pistol, and I got like 10 shots over here, and then I'm just dual wielding with those. Like, I'm sure there's gonna be limits to it. I don't think they're gonna, unless you pull out the VR mode, I don't think you're gonna be dual wielding shotguns and stuff like that. It'll be limited to handguns, handguns, the Lugers, and then, the machine guns. And that's pretty much it. That's my guess, at least, unless they could throw in like a sawed-off shotgun. That would be something that you could technically hold with one hand. But I assume that they're gonna keep it somewhat simple at the very least. It's, obviously me just speculating, of course, want to know your guesses and everything like that, because there's a lot to do with this horde mechanic, with the way that they've done, like I said, aside from the whole teleporting situation from 9, they have made enemies either more aggressive or take a ridiculous amount of damage. I mean, heck, even if you go back to 2, where they do move a bit slower until they get like within a certain range, then they're like lunging all the time. That's why I consider them to still be faster. Like they move slow, but once they're like within a certain range, I feel like they move like 3 times faster. So even with that, they were taking a ridiculous amount of health, or amount of damage, I should say, because they had so much health. Like you would think you killed them. Like that was almost like a famous part of the 2 remake, is that you would literally like think you like shredded a zombie, and then you do some stuff and you come back and it's like, how are you getting up? Like this should not be happening. So they took a lot of damage in 2. They somewhat fixed that in 3, and then 4, of course, was the Ganados and Los Ganados is, or the Las Plagas. The Ganados is 5. Or no. Yeah. Ganados is 5. Las Plagas is 4. I feel like I'm messing up with that. I feel like, no, either way, it doesn't matter. I'm mixing my stuff up. Point is, with the way that they have zombies being a lot more visceral in this, past couple of games, I am very curious how this horde section is going to pan out, especially with this dual wield mechanic, and what options we're going to really have to start taking out hordes. Like, are they going to, is another mechanic, which is in Resident Evil, has been for decades at this point, but are we going to have enemies react even more to each other? Because the zombies don't really trip over each other. That's not like much of a thing. You get like your grabs, or obviously if you're doing an actual spin attack, whoever's in the range gets hit. But classic Resident Evil, you get some bites, you shove them off, they do that little push lean back thing, you get like 3 zombies and they all hit the exact same animation like they're in a dance routine. And it's like, okay, everybody's taking like a slight pause and then you run past them. So I'm curious if they're gonna add in even more details for like zombies interacting with each other as hordes. Like if you're hitting a bunch of leg shots and then one of them actually does get stunned and they tumble, does that take down like the other 2 or 3 coming up behind them? Because it seemed like, once again, the zombies will probably move a little slow, and then they'll do what they did in like the 2 and the 3 remake, where once you're close, then they like the speed increases like tenfold, it feels like. So with them being in hordes, it seems like they'll automatically be moving a bit faster. So I think, and once again, all guesses, obviously, I have nothing to do with the game. I wish I did. But if the hordes are like what we saw in the end of the trailer, if they're mostly like kind of moving at a faster clip, they can make the specific horde zombies, at least when they're, there's a whole lot of digital stuff in the background of this, but if they're hordes, in the code, they might make it where they stun faster and they do trip on each other. Obviously speculation, because otherwise they take a bunch of damage or they have to balance out how much damage they actually take. So it would be cool to see what ends up happening with that if they add in more mechanics where it's like, okay, if a certain amount of zombies are, you know, in a group, they create a horde, and then that kind of changes the mechanics of like their health and their stun rate and stuff like that. And then it's like, okay, we put in the mechanic where they will actually, you know, trip on each other. Like I said, you know, old school Resident Evil, a zombie biting on you, you push it off, and then it bumps into another zombie, and then they all do the little lean back. Keep it like that. You know, if a zombie's running at you, or, you know, a small horde is coming at you, you blow out like a couple legs, and then they all start tumbling over each other, and then it, you know, it might change the code. Like once they start to branch off from each other, then it's like, okay, now we can kind of change the stun rates and their health and stuff, or maybe the health stays the same, but just change the stun rate, and that's about it. So I would love to see that. I think that is, you know, obviously it's a hope, but it seems like a simple mechanic because they already have a lot of, you know, mechanics of, you know, characters interacting with the zombies, and not a ton, I would say, as far as zombies interacting with each other. At most, I would say, well, heck, they don't even have that anymore. I was gonna say, like, at most, I would say like zombies kind of like double teaming you, but that ended, you know, with RE3 remake. But that could also come back because they don't really do that in RE4, and they don't really do that in 9 either. You typically, it's like a one-on-one situation, or they'll just, you know, they'll just hit you and stuff like that. So I'm excited to see what ends up happening with this, but I thought this was some pretty good news. I was like, okay, that literally explains like an actual mechanic of gameplay, you know, from the end of the actual trailer, where she pans up and it's a couple of different zombies there together, and they kind of shoot at her, and it's like, oh, that wasn't just like a cool, you know, trailer situation, which I figured that was an actual cutscene anyway, which I was like, you know, how did she get out of that? But now it's not just that, it's also like a full-on game mechanic where you'll have hordes, which could consist, you know, I think in that it was maybe like 5 or 6 zombies. So it doesn't have to be, you know, a giant horde or anything where it's like, you know, Walking Dead style where it's like hundreds of zombies coming at you. But I think it's a really great mechanic. I like the idea, at least, you know, obviously I'm just making things up in my head. Like, well, what if they do add in, you know, more interactivity between the zombies? They can actually fall over each other, at the very least in that very specific setting. That would be really cool. I think it would be a great mechanic in general if they added, you know, some elements like that. And it seems simple enough, you know, it's small enough to just be like, hey, if they're running and they're so dead set on you, they won't, you know, they won't focus on what's in front of them, which, you know, they're zombies, so they wouldn't anyway. They would just kind of tumble over it. That would be great, even for just slow walking zombies. If you killed a zombie and one was just coming at you, they aren't really going to focus on the ground. That would actually be a cool mechanic to add into Resident Evil in general. I would love to see that, where it's like, hey, if I you know, it might be like a second playthrough type of thing, but it's like, I'm gonna just kill this zombie straight in front of this door, and then I'll let a bunch of other zombies kind of, you know, fumble through and constantly fall and make it easier on myself. Like little, you know, it's all sorts of like silly ideas that you probably just see in people, you know, people doing in YouTube videos. But you could, depending on certain areas of the game and how difficult they may or may not be, you could actually strategize small elements like that. And who knows, like I said, I'm just thinking off the top of my head because it's a cool idea. You have hordes coming into the game. Clearly, the counter to that is the dual wielding mechanic, and she's going to be dual wielding based on the render of her character having 2 holsters. They're keeping that in, which is like the greatest thing ever. But I didn't really have much doubt that they would. But I am excited to see how it pans out, and definitely what are the limitations on it. Like, do we have, you know, like I said, just stick it to handguns and, you know, machine guns at most, like the submachine guns, or will they add extra stuff? I mean, even if they add multiple handguns, they can have, you know, well, they already have the submachine guns, but they could add anything, and who knows what could really happen with that. You know, maybe this is one of the things that I think is unfortunately not going to happen just because of the times that we're in, where I'm like, man, you know what would be a really fun unlockable? If you had like a, you know, like no holds bar dual wield mode, where you just unlock the ability to hold 2 different weapons, regardless of what they are. You can just have like 2 shotguns or 2 handguns. That is the type of thing that I would love to see as an unlockable, but that would never happen. That's like, you know, that's like PS1, PS2 era type of unlockables, where it's like, hey, here's a mechanic that like totally changes the game, because now you can, it would honestly just be like playing in VR, where you can dual wield shotguns and have whatever you want in your hands, which is great. It's super fun to do that because it's just silly and interesting. I don't see that happening. At least it's not as far as, you know, the main game isn't unlockable, so that's just something we'll have to wait on until the VR update hits. But I like the idea that they're adding to the tension of being like, hey, And I would say Code Veronica was pretty good with that in general. Like, they definitely put in a decent amount of zombies. I'm very curious how the intro to the game is going to be compared to the intro to the first one, as far as like actual gameplay, because they just throw you in a graveyard with a knife, and then a bunch of zombies come out the ground. It's like, that's the craziest intro ever. Like, I literally just got out here, and you're just throwing me in, and you gotta like run around the zombies as they're already out of the ground. Like, I don't know if I've ever made it out of that portion of the game without genuinely, like taking a hit before. So we'll see what happens with that. All things considered, we shall see. But I'm excited. I thought that was really cool. So I just wanted to talk about it for a hot minute and just ask you guys, like, what do you think is going to happen? Because I think for sure the hordes are going to be countered with whatever the modern day version of the dual wielding mechanic is going to end up being. But then we have tons of questions on top of that, like, well, what are the limits? What does, like I said, the idea of the zombies interacting in a brand new way seems simple enough. If they're running at you, easier to trip, you knock the whole crowd down or half the crowd or whatever. Seems like a simple mechanic to add in my opinion. But they might not do that. They might just be in a horde, and then you just get some distance and you dual wield and hope you make it. But I'm looking forward to it either way. I thought that was really cool, so I was excited to talk about that because it leans harder into the dual wielding mechanic being really important to the game, because it was kind of just a cool factor in the original, but it was also tied specifically to like 2 sets of weapons, and that was it. But you had multiple handguns. So I'm curious, like I said, if they allow you to mix and match it now, where it's like, hey, you got the submachine gun and a regular pistol, go for it. Like, as long as it's a single-handed weapon, it should work. That's my personal opinion. It should work. But I will say this: Resident Evil has done some weird stuff. As much as I've been enjoying, our modern Resident Evil 9 is still super weird for having like 3 unlockable pistols, or at the very least like 1 pistol and 2 magnums, and then they, for whatever reason, didn't attach them to Grace, even though she uses the Requiem in the game, so she could clearly just hold the unlockable magnums too, plus the Matilda. But they're like, that only goes to Leon, and she gets 1 gun, and it's like, well, that literally doesn't make any sense. They're still, just handguns. Why wouldn't she be able to hold them? So hopefully they fix that, and that's not a weird issue that we end up dealing with in the Code Veronica remake, and they don't make it awkward and just be like, we just didn't do it for whatever reason. And they keep it nice and simple. And it's like, hey, here is this gun. It's a handgun. Here's a submachine gun. Each of these can be used with 1 hand. That means you can holster them both. You can do it with any single-handed weapon. I think is the simplest solution to the entire thing. Like, that should be the answer. But of course, we will just have to wait and see. But I would love to know what you guys think. Like, is it possible? Are they gonna actually do it? Are they gonna give a crap? Are they not gonna give a crap? What do you guys think we should expect to see now that they've introduced this horde mechanic? And what do you think the mechanics of dual wielding will change into within this remake? So I would love to know your thoughts. So please put your comments down in the comment section below. And of course, thanks for watching.